Puri, if you speak with global CEOs today, while they talk about the opportunities that India presents and they talk about the headroom for potential growth from here, I think one of the things that is weighing on CEOs and global boards today is the geopolitical risk. And many argue that India perhaps is better placed today from a geopolitical standpoint, given what's happening between Russia and Ukraine and now what's happening in the Middle East. As geoeconomics and geopolitics gets converged more so, what do you believe will have to be India's position as we move forward?
Let's separate the two. One is the content of the bilateral relationship, and the other is the evolving geopolitical situation. When you come to this terrorist atrocity, it's nothing other than that, by Hamas. There was not a moment's hesitation. I think the Prime Minister came out right up front immediately and talked about us and where we stood with Israel. So that's the distance we've traveled. Insofar as the geopolitical situation is concerned, I have a slightly more orthodox view, and I look at it from the energy sector and other parts of the economic interaction. I think the fundamental thing is that the multilateral institutions which were designed in 1945 to deal with a situation which was A, post-war reconstruction, B, to the victor belong the spoils, that is, the countries which were on the winning side would be permanent members of the Security Council, and C, which was a question of an intellectual compatibility between people who met in that sleepy village in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods and designed the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and so on. We've traveled from there. I think, in fairness to those who have stepped on the gas and wanted an acceleration of the content and the nature of the bilateral relationship, the India-US civil nuclear deal was one such event. Against full marks, the then Prime Minister was willing to stake the future of his government to get that deal through, even though I don't think we've done $1 worth of contracting underneath, but that's a separate issue. Today, I think the nature of the relationship, what it is today, I'm not measuring it in terms of that figure you gave me, $192 billion. Shereen, I am always one of those who has a standard line in any such statement that this is still waits to be fully exploited and worked, and I genuinely believe that. I think the United States and India are two countries which have so much going for each other that if the geopolitical turmoil increases, then the potential for that bilateral relationship, in fact, increases. It is on many fronts, and I can I think the CEOs, when you name it, the other day, somebody sent me a list of 25 CEOs of Indian origin. I was very carefully going through that. That's the 26th I found. I said the new Honeywell CEO is also, so I see all my friends sitting here. Look, that is traditional, that will grow, but I think the important feeling I get is that there is a loss of inhibition and hesitation. And I think we have shed that inhibition some time ago. I find the United States also willing to reciprocate. And I want to be the devil's advocate. If not India, who? I mean, yeah, you have other choices to get into, but the kind of depth and diversity and across economic sectors in terms of future and technology, what have you? I think the experiences of the last few years, whatever, I'm not getting into any discussion on that kind, but those will enhance and strengthen the imperative of taking the bilateral relationship to newer heights.
Well, speaking of taking the bilateral relationship to newer heights in the context of what you believe has been this shedding of inhibitions and sort of new confidence on both sides, outside of the traditional areas, and I listed out a whole bunch of new areas where this partnership is hoping to forge greater potential, what is it that you would like both sides to focus on? There has been significant movement, specifically on the defense side, much to the surprise of people who were looking at this development closely. Where do you believe we could potentially see accelerated movement?
Look, I think the areas have been identified. They find resonance in the joint statements, if you should. You mentioned some of them. I'm not the line minister, so I think it'll be completely wrong for me to do some prioritization of my own. I think that's for the External Affairs Ministry, those who deal with foreign and security policy to do. But as a line minister in ministries which have solid economic content, I'm seeing things happen which I never could visualize earlier. But even on energy, I mean, I don't think our total bilateral relationship was $20 billion when you and I were on the desk. Today we buy $20 billion of energy from the US per year. And the US has a different approach to issues relating to energy than OPEC does. And I don't see any hesitation on our side or their side to pushing that forward. When we started talking about the Biofuels Alliance, one of the strongest supporters was Secretary Granholm. When we talk about green hydrogen, she has been one of the strongest advocates. In my first conversation with her after I was associated with the Petroleum and Natural Gas Ministry, I'm talking about July 21, the first very meeting, she put green hydrogen up front. I'm very often invited with an attempt to provoke me to comment on something called an Inflation Reduction Act.
Yes, I was about to get to that.
I mean, I'll anticipate you're asking me, and I'll say I'm not going to get provoked. It's entirely, I mean, whether that is viewed as a charge on the state exchequer and you want to call it a subsidy, I'm not getting into that. I am one of those who's wedded to a movement away from fossil fuels, and I think green hydrogen is the fuel of the future. So if I see a situation in which a country as important as the United States, both for strategic and other reasons, is going to put in how many? A couple of $100 billion more, okay, into that. But I have a different approach. I say I want my companies to take advantage of that. What do you need to do green hydrogen? You need to have clean, cheap solar energy. We've demonstrated that we can bring the price of a unit down from 25 cents to 3 cents a unit. We've done that. And you need electrolyzers. And I think the government has been upfront. We have got electrolyzers included in the PLI. I have a lot of companies who are getting investment in from all over the place. And I conclude by saying green hydrogen will succeed where there is demand, where there is local production, and there is consumption. And I can't think of too many countries other than the United States and India where that is likely to happen. Because the gas does not lend itself to transportation. You can take green ammonia, as we are exporting to Uniper in Germany or to Singapore for their new GE electricity plant. But otherwise what you require is local consumption. And that is what is happening. By the way, I mean, I can be a little naughty and say, if you subsidize green hydrogen, send us some of your subsidized green hydrogen. I'll be happy to get our companies to take advantage. But, you know, that's another kind of discussion.
Sure. Well, you know, we will talk about the many changes that we're seeing as far as the energy transition is concerned, and I'll revisit that issue in just a second. But Ed Knight, let me talk to you about the opportunities that have opened up from an India perspective and potential areas of collaboration for the US. I mean, the Indian capital markets have deepened and deepened quite significantly. Even on the bond market side, India has just been included, the Indian bonds included in the JP Morgan Emerging Market Bond Index. Derivative volumes, India today the highest. How do you see the opportunities opening up for both sides?
One thing I would emphasize with the Honorable Minister, and it's an honor to be with you at this stage, and with Atul, and with all of you, is the personal element of this. And we talk about a partnership, but it's more than that. It's a friendship between the two countries. And one of the things we are very focused on at the USIBC under Atul's leadership is building trust, because the relationship is really not going to deepen unless that trust is there. But we have something that's very unique here, what I'd call the diaspora dividend. When COVID hit your country so hard, I saw a reaction from the American business community that really surprised me overnight. And I asked myself, why is every CEO on this conference call trying to figure out how we can do more to help our friends in India? And it's because those friends are in India, but they're also at our companies. There's Sanjit and Arti and Nipun at NASDAQ who are my friends who are Indian. And when I think of India, I think of them. And it is a special relationship. It doesn't exist in a bilateral way between U.S. business and other countries, in that our employees, our colleagues are Indians, and we feel a connection, a DNA that doesn't exist in other relationships. And that trust is something that's very important to NASDAQ. Our market would not operate every morning with millions of people coming together unless people trusted our technology. These markets are advancing very quickly. They are with AI, the cloud, and other new technologies. We want to work with India on how they can deepen their market, how they can capitalize their companies in a more efficient way. We want to supply data to these markets, which is really the lifeblood. You talk about the bond index. That data that JP Morgan distributed created opportunities and information that drives the creation of a deeper bond market in Indian sovereign debt. I think Jamie Dimon estimated it at $25 billion.
That's right.
And so it's that sort of collaboration that I see happening in the financial markets around the cloud, artificial intelligence. There's going to be a whole new generation of data centers around the world. And to enable artificial intelligence applications. But those data centers are going to probably have an element of sovereignty involved in it, because they're going to be so critical to the economies where they're located. And you're going to have to work in partnership with government and with local partners to build those and to take technology to the next level, take markets to the next level. We're excited about that, and USIBC is at the front line of that.
Well, I'll talk about the pipeline that's likely to be exploited to try and get Indian companies to list on the NASDAQ as well. But Ambassador Keshap, let me come to you now to talk about the unique opportunities that both Minister Puri as well as Ed Knight just spoke of, and the sweet spot that we find India and the US in, and this trusted partnership that is developing. Technology, of course, has been the big area of collaboration and partnership, but manufacturing more so, especially in the context of China Plus One, or who but India, in Minister Puri's words. What could be the accelerant there that you would like to emphasize?
Shereen ji, thank you very much. And what a great panel to be on. I feel very privileged. I'm always intimidated when I appear in public with Minister Hardeep Singh Puri. It's kind of like having a student appear in front of a master and hope to pass the exam. But I'm joined here by a lot of distinguished colleagues from the Indian Foreign Service. Greetings to both of you. And, of course, colleagues from the U.S. government, Arun Kumar, and others from the American Embassy. It reminds me of something. A long time ago when I was a kid, I would come here to India from Africa. My dad was posted in the UN in Africa. And we'd come home every year, and home was in two directions. One was to Panipat, where my grandmother lived, and the other was in Newport News, Virginia, where my other grandmother lived. And the itinerary was always the same: Africa to India to Europe to Vienna, and then down to the States to Newport News and back home. Leaving Africa after a year out there, all of my clothes were tattered and torn. All of our electronics were junk. And we'd come home to India, and people wanted everything. everything. Give me your jeans. Oh, I can't give you my jeans. I don't have any to fly to the next place. And it reminds me of how much desperation there was in an economy that was very different from what it is today. We had the chief economic advisor of India give us a presentation today to the board. India's economy is booming. It is sizzling. It is the envy of the entire world. What's the point about the tattered, faded, old blue jeans? I'm going to get to the point. The other day, I took my daughter to go buy a phone in Clarendon in Arlington, Virginia. And the fella gave us the phone, and there it said, designed by Apple in California and built in India. And I thought, holy moly, here we go. You know, like this is India rock and roll. This is India building up a head of steam to resume its rightful place as generating as much as a quarter or a third of global input. And it's truly a heartwarming moment for someone like me, who's Indian American and who's lived through that era of desperation and poverty and, frankly, stagnation. It's one of the reasons my dad left India in 1958. He had no choices. A young Indian today has more choice than almost any young person on earth. And the possibility that this country is going to grow by leaps and bounds is truly inspiring. So on manufacturing, I feel like the government of India has put in sustained focus and sustained effort to harmonize its rules and regulations, to look at ease of doing business, level playing field, regulatory predictability and coherence, and also to reach out to the companies and bring them in and invite them and say, all right, tell us what you need. Let's see what we can do. Now, doing that in a complicated, layered, diverse democracy is always tough, but India has absolutely pulled it off. And I think given the geostrategic tensions and given the fact that the United States and India are the two largest members of a community of high-trust societies, free high-trust societies, I think you're going to see a lot more manufacturing in India. Personally, as an American, I hope a lot of that happens in America too. And I think that if we can spark manufacturing in America and India, it's going to be better for all of our citizens, frankly, better for people all around the world, better for our economic freedom and sovereignty, and of course will lift people to new standards of prosperity. So I'm very optimistic. I commend the government of India on what they've done. I want to see even more of that, and I think USIBC companies are playing an absolutely leading role in trying to drive that manufacturing to high-trust societies.
At night, let's speak about the opportunities. You know, we talked about how the Indian economy is growing at 7%. It's expected to continue at that pace. Growth capital is going to be required. People are talking about listing here in India, but they're also looking at listing abroad. The Indian government at this point in time is looking at formulating rules for direct listings across different jurisdictions. You know, what excites you about this space that's opening up?
Well, we welcome the government looking at that, but I would ask people when they think about this to not think about the United States, not think about the London Stock Exchange or Hong Kong. Think about what is in the interest of India and growing this economy. And if you assume, as I do, that technological innovation and growth and entrepreneurship is important to create jobs and make this economy grow, then what do you need? You need capital. Mm-hmm. And that capital often comes from venture capital and private equity. And what are they thinking? They're thinking about immediately when they invest, how do they get out of that investment? How do they exit it at a high multiple? Mm-hmm. And the question is, where do you get the highest multiple? And often it is in India. But there are companies, because of the nature of the products, the nature of their operations, that they want to reach the global investor in, and to do it through NASDAQ is often the most efficient way to do it. ARM, a very innovative British chip designer owned by a man in Japan, where did they list?
Yeah.
You had prime ministers talking to them about listing in the... They chose NASDAQ. We're very proud of that. We have to earn that every day, but it's because we deliver value and efficiency, and that capital goes back to the country where the entrepreneurs are, and it helps grow that pie. forget whether we get a listing fee or trading fees. So, I mean, my shareholders like that. I like that. We're excited about entrepreneurs. We're excited about the fact that 80% of all the IPOs in the United States come to NASDAQ, that the 5 largest companies in the world list on NASDAQ other than Aramco. And so we go out and work for that, and we do it by delivering value in efficient capital formation that can benefit your economy. Why are 100 Israeli companies listed on NASDAQ? They have a very strong tech sector, and they seek that global tech investor on our market. We're proud of that. We have to earn that, and you have choices, but it's about what is good for India, and it should be done on terms that are consistent with your culture, your values, and your laws. And we welcome the opportunity to work with the government on this.
Minister Puri, if I could, I think we have a couple of more minutes left before we close for the evening. If I could draw you back to the big announcement that came in at the G20 on the economic corridor, and in light of the geopolitical tensions and the escalation of what we're seeing happen in the Middle East, the implications of that on that announcement.
The implications of that announcement, irrespective of when the announcement had been made, are huge. You have a corridor running from here to the Gulf, through Saudi Arabia, onto Europe, etc., and with logistical this thing right to the United States. It does several things at the same time. One, it produces a structured corridor is perhaps too, common language. It produces a movement, a possibility for movement of goods and services in both directions. It deals with issues of connectivity. It bypasses the kind of impediments that there are. And it takes you to between the United States, Italy, or other parts of Europe there, and starting off from here. What is the significance of all these places on the map in terms of economic geography, etc.? And I think that the full value, the realization for that is just beginning to sink in. And normally somebody would have turned around and said, now we've got these geopolitical tensions and what happened in this thing, Hamas, Israel. No, it makes that even more important, I think. And I think how this situation plays itself out, how this evolving situation is managed, and how we revert back to heightened economic activity, that is where now, there are certain steps that you have to take. This is a conceptual thing. Just now, it has the sign-on of a large number of very important countries who will make this possible. It also has the potential of challenging some of the earlier ideas that were thrown around in a different part. Those are not as viable because, as we've seen, where that initiative has been implemented, it's produced debt. The countries have had to give up their territory in order to meet their debt obligations. So it's a very different thing. I used to say even then, I said if the central bank of a country has surpluses, it can finance that thing. But if you want to bring in private players, private capital will want a return on it. Otherwise, how is this going to happen? So I think that this kind of a model is far more viable. It is this thing, and that's why it has attracted so much of interest and excitement.